The silent man in Section 7. The diplomatic shuttle was quiet that night. Too quiet. It drifted between two dead systems, carrying ambassadors, soldiers, and scholars from 26 species. On paper, it was a symbol of peace. In truth, it was a pressure chamber and something inside was ready to explode. Section 7 was the lowest deck, cold, dim, and barely maintained. It was meant for overflow crew, but now it held only one human. He did not speak. He did not smile. He kept his eyes low and his hands folded. Some thought he was mute. Others thought he was slow. But he wasn't. He was just waiting, and something inside him was breathing. The crew whispered about him. Not by name, no one knew it. He hadn't offered it. He was just the silent man. Some avoided him. Some watched him when they thought he couldn't see. They noticed he didn't eat much. They noticed he didn't sleep often. And when he did, the ship's lights flickered. They called it coincidence. Commander Thalren of the Ekshavari Empire didn't believe in coincidence. She had demanded the human be removed from the diplomatic list. A species so young, she had growled, should not walk beside gods. No one listened. They said the human had earned his place. He'd saved an ambassador once. They said he'd been vouched for by the High Chancellor herself. Thalren didn't care. She felt it in her bones. Something was wrong with him, and tonight she decided to confront it. "Human," she barked, stepping into Section 7. He was sitting in the dark, staring at the wall. His eyes reflected faint red from the emergency lights above. When she entered, he didn't move, didn't blink. "You will speak," she ordered. Nothing. The hum of the ship's engines grew quieter somehow, or maybe it was just her heart pounding. "You were never meant to be here," she said, slower now. "You are not a diplomat. You are not a warrior. You are nothing." He tilted his head slightly. Just slightly. Like he was listening to something. Only he could hear. She felt her throat tighten. Her instincts screamed. She ignored them. "I looked into your history," she said. "But there is none. Just a record of transfer. No academy, no battles, no family." He smiled. Barely. It was the kind of smile you see just before a door opens to something you shouldn't find. "Who are you?" she whispered, suddenly unsure. He looked up at her, and then he spoke. His voice was soft, hollow, like it was borrowed. "You already know." Alarm started the next morning. Lieutenant Selka, one of the ship's engineers, was found in her room. Eyes wide, mouth open, hands curled, like she'd been holding on to something that wasn't there. No wounds, no poison, just death. The medics called it brain collapse. The ship's priest said it was a soul fracture. Nobody believed either. 3 hours later, another death. A diplomat from the Azuria sector. This time, it was worse. His body was still breathing, but his mind was gone. When they scanned his brainwaves, they found something strange. He was dreaming. But the dreams weren't his. They traced both deaths to one location. Section 7. The silent man had not left it in days. The council met in secret. Some wanted him thrown into deep space. Others said he should be questioned, examined. But Thalren said no. "He has awakened something," she said, voice shaking for the first time. "We need to understand what." They sent the priestess of the second flame, a telepath, into Section 7. She did not return. Only her voice came back, echoing through the speakers 2 hours later. "He sees me," she whispered across the ship. "He sees all of you. He remembers everything we've forgotten, and he is not alone in there." Then silence, not static, not distortion, just silence. A black hole of sound. Crew began seeing shadows in the halls, the kind that didn't belong to anyone. A cook ran screaming into the cargo bay, claiming he'd heard a child weeping in the vents. The security drones found no child, but they did find an old Javari sigil drawn on the wall in dried blood. A sigil from ancient myth. A warning. The last time it had been recorded in galactic history, a moon cracked open from the inside. That moon had vanished 2,000 years. Egothalrin returned to Section 7 alone. She found him standing this time. His eyes were glowing faintly, not with power, but with memory. Ancient, burning memory. She stepped back without realizing. He took one step forward, and then she saw it behind him. Not a shadow, not a person, but something else. Something wearing the shape of a woman. Tall, shimmering, impossible. A goddess. The old kind. She reached toward Thalrin, not with malice, but with recognition. The commander dropped to her knees, her voice cracked. "What are you?" The man looked down at her. "You saw death in me," he said, voice now layered, like others were speaking with him. "But you forgot who gave it shape." The goddess stepped beside him and smiled. The lights above flickered, the walls groaned, and all across the ship, the stars outside turned red. The goddess in the walls, the ship never truly slept. But that night, it held its breath. Section 7 was sealed. 3 security locks, manual override disabled. They said it was for safety, but everyone knew it was fear. Even the brave ones. The soldiers with chrome implants, the warriors of Fireblood and Warbreed. They stayed away from that hallway now, and yet, the whispers still came through. Not sound, not voices, just feelings, crawling behind the eyes, tightening the spine, like memories from a dream you never lived. Commander Thalrin had not reported since she entered. Her comms were dead. So was her escort squad. 20 elite Shivari, armored in sacred alloy. None of them answered the call, only static replied, and the ship's air felt heavier, as if breathing now came at a cost. Diplomat Rena Viss, a young woman from the Siren Collective, was the first to try speaking up. "Something ancient is stirring," she told the High Council, her voice trembling in front of the ship's circular chamber. "It's not just him, it's her. The figure behind him, the one we're pretending doesn't exist." Some laughed. Others listened. "I saw her," Rena whispered, eyes wet. "Not with my eyes, but in my mind, in my sleep." She stood behind a wall, whispering, calling. "What did she say?" someone asked. "She said she's waking up." They tried to scan Section 7 again. This time, the sensors returned readings that made no sense. A gravity spike, 10 times normal mass in one localized zone. A time distortion field that seemed to stretch and bend every few seconds like reality was pulsing from inside the walls. And most disturbing of all, a second heartbeat, not biological, not mechanical. Something else was living inside the ship now. The cleaning drones went first, then the repair team, then the priesthood of the fifth veil. One by one they entered Section 7. None returned. But the ship changed every time they did. Hallways shifted slightly. Doors reformed in different places. Markings appeared along the metal, glowing faint blue and violet. Ancient language, long buried by time and war. Only one crew member, an old human engineer named Rogan, recognized it. He screamed when he read it. He screamed until he bit off his own tongue. The only word they could pull from his sobs before he passed out was prophecy. Somewhere deep in the hull, a new voice started speaking through the internal comms, not the man's, not anyone from the crew. The voice was soft, layered with echoes that sounded like wind through bones. "He was broken," it said. "But we rebuilt him, and now he remembers. He remembers what you all forgot." No one knew where the signal was coming from. When they traced it, it led to the wall of the ship itself, as if the metal was speaking, as if she was speaking. Meanwhile, the silent man remained in Section 7, untouched by time or panic. They checked. Cameras. He hadn't moved in hours, but things around him had. The temperature changed every few seconds. The walls sometimes breathed, On one recording, a crew member claimed he saw the man split into two figures for a single frame. One was himself. The other, taller, glowing, cloaked in threads of starlight. They called her the goddess. Others had different names: the Weaver of Ends, the First Dream of Fear, the Queen Behind the Wall, and still, the deaths continued. One by one, crew members began forgetting their own names. They would walk the halls aimlessly, eyes blank, lips smiling. They would whisper the name Kairos over and over again. No one knew what it meant, but the silent man whispered it too. Once, when the captain overrode a locked transmission line to Section 7, she heard him say it in a voice not his own. "Kairos watches," he said, "and she remembers who betrayed her." After that, the captain ordered the ship to turn back, but the engines refused to obey. Navigation showed the ship still moving, but not in space, in something else. A new hallway appeared that night. No one had built it. It wasn't on the schematics, but there it was, running alongside the crew quarters. One end was sealed. The other led into darkness that seemed to swallow light. A security unit sent a drone inside. It never returned. But the footage it sent back before it disappeared showed something no one could explain. A cathedral. Inside the ship, towering stone arches, endless stairs, and at the center, floating in silence, a statue of a woman, no face, just eyes, hundreds of them, and at her feet, kneeling, was the silent man, bleeding, laughing. The alien goddess was no longer hiding. She had become the ship. She was in the lights, the wires, the dreams. No one knew how long they had. Crew began marking their doors with blood, salt, or prayers from their homeworlds. None of it worked. On the 5th day, an entire section of the ship was gone. Just gone. A clean slice. No alarms. No warning. 32 souls erased. The systems claimed they had never existed. But the rest of the crew remembered. Their grief became another kind of silence. Some begged the silent man to speak, again. They sent messages. Some cried into the intercom. Some cursed him. He never answered. Until one night, he whispered 4 words into the dark. Words that made no sense, but froze the blood of every translator on the ship. "She wears your shame." They decoded it the next day. It was a fragment from an old human myth, something from Earth's forgotten age. A story about a being born from the sins of 1,000 worlds. A being made from grief, regret, and unfinished wars. A goddess who only awakens when the stars forget themselves. "We brought her with us," said diplomat Rena Viss, her eyes wide, lips trembling. "We thought he was the threat." She looked at the rest of the council. He was the vessel. She looked up at the ceiling as the lights flickered again. "But she is the storm." The engine screamed. The stars outside twisted into symbols, and far below, in Section 7, the walls began to melt. The truth he cannot forget. The air was changing. Those who breathed it too long began to dream, and those who dreamed too long forgot who they were. By the 7th night aboard the diplomatic vessel Dawnreach, even the strongest minds on the ship had started to crack. Not from fear, not from isolation, but from something older, something that scraped at the edges of memory like claws scratching behind the walls of the mind. Engineer Telvin hung himself with a coolant pipe. He left a message scrawled in broken symbols across his floor. No one could read it, but the silent man smiled when they showed it to him. Navigator Chai tried to open the emergency airlock, not to escape, but to let her in, and worse still, the ship's medics began to whisper of strange growths, bone-like structures forming behind the eyes of the infected. Like antlers made of starlight and sorrow, it was spreading. And Section 7, where the silent man still sat, beneath flickering lights, was now completely cut off. But they knew he was alive. He didn't need food, didn't need water, and the heat sensors still pulsed with something beating. Not a heart, something deeper, something buried. They gathered in the command dome, the last leaders, 20 species, all once proud, now hollow-eyed, barely speaking above whispers. "He is a doorway," said Priestess Nivelle, her voice like brittle glass, a broken thing rebuilt by grief. "He carries the truth inside him, not because he wants to, because he cannot forget it." "What truth?" asked Admiral Gairn, voice shaking. The priestess looked up, eyes glowing softly. "The truth we sealed away, the truth we all buried when we built peace upon the ashes of war." She placed her hand on the console. "He was there when it began." Made no sense. His record said he was only 30 human years old. He could not have been at the beginning of the Galactic Accords, not when the stars were still bleeding, and the first empires collapsed under the weight of their guilt. But then again, his records were false. Everything about him was false. Only the fear was real. They sent another drone. This one, armed with old tech, pre-contact systems, things untouched by alien hands. It was designed to resist psionic interference. It made it further than the others, through the corridor, past the melting bulkhead, and into the place that should not exist. They called it the threshold. The footage showed a room wider than the shuttle could hold, stone pillars rising into infinity, walls shifting like breath, and in the center a pool of darkness, liquid, thick, endless. He stood at its edge, the silent man, but now he was weeping and whispering names, thousands of names. Names of planets, names of species, names of those who no longer existed. And then the goddess emerged behind him, not walking, not rising, just becoming. Her form was not one shape. It changed as the drone watched. A mother, a lover, a judge, a grave. And when her gaze fell upon the camera, it shattered. The drone's systems melted in silence, but not before transmitting one last line of audio. A human voice. The silent man. I never wanted to remember. They finally knew who he was. He had no name, because he had too many. He was not born human. He had become human. After the burning of his first home, after the extinction of his first people, he had walked the stars, carrying memory like a curse, until one day he was found floating in the void by an Earth vessel, barely alive. He should have died. But the goddess had chosen otherwise. She had bound herself to him. Why? No one knew. Some said she was the last echo of the universe before time. Others claimed she was a punishment created by forgotten gods. But the priestess had a different answer. She was once a mortal, Nivelle said, eyes closed. Betrayed by the 26, broken and scattered, we called her myth, we called her dead. But we never truly killed her. We only left her sleeping. She opened her eyes, tears falling. And he is her memory. The ship began to rot. The walls pulsed like flesh, metal bent like bone. Gravity shifted without warning. Some began walking on ceilings without noticing. Some forgot the shape of their own names, and in every reflective surface her eyes watched, glowing, endless, cruel. Diplomat Rena Viss tore off her comms implant and carved runes into her arms to keep her mind from slipping. She said she saw the past, flashes of a war older than time. Millions of bodies, a sky split open by a scream, and the goddess, broken, chained, and thrown into the abyss. By them. By the very ancestors of the 26 species aboard this ship. The silent man had been a child in that war. His people had followed her, believed in her, and they were erased for it. Now he carried her soul like a wound, and it was bleeding through the walls. No one slept anymore, because to sleep was to enter her memory. And there, she showed them the truth. She showed them what they had done. Ambassador Volric, a scholar of the ancient tongue, woke up screaming. He'd seen his own hands in the dream, placing the chain around her throat. I was there, he cried. We all were. Different faces, different lives, but it was us. We did this. The others didn't believe him, but they were beginning to remember too. Through nightmares, hallucinations, echoes. The ship was no longer moving through space. It was moving through guilt, and the goddess was guiding it home. Her voice came again, this time through every system, every screen, every surface. You made him your witness. You called him human. But he remembers the shape of betrayal. And now, so will you. The lights died. The stars vanished. And somewhere, deep in the ship, a door opened. Not a real door, a door in the mind. And behind it, something waited with open arms. Something that had waited for so long. The door we should not open. No one knew when the door appeared. Some said it was always there, hidden behind layers of code and steel, masked by systems too afraid to notice. Others said it grew, birthed by the ship's own guilt, carved from the shared silence of those who had watched too long and done too little. It was not a door made of wood or metal. It had no handle, no hinges, just a boundary, shaped like a tear in the world. On the 6th night, it began to breathe. Not fast, not loud. Slow, patient, as if something behind it was tasting the air. Captain Eli Venn was the only one who volunteered to approach it. He had served in the wars. He had seen stars fall, had watched comrades turn to ash and planets vanish under betrayal. But even, he trembled as he stood before the door. "You don't have to do this," Rena Viss said, her voice raw from sleepless nights. "We're already past the line," Eli whispered. "We just haven't admitted it yet." He stepped forward, and the door opened for him. No sound, no light, just a space. And then he was gone. They waited. 6 minutes passed. Then 12. At 15, they heard him scream. At 18, the sound became wrong, not pain, not fear, something deeper, like his soul was being remembered against his will. When he finally stumbled back out, his eyes were gone. Not burned, emptied, but he was smiling. A wide, childlike smile. "She forgives nothing," he whispered. "And he forgets nothing." Then he collapsed. His body was breathing, but his mind was missing. They put him in stasis. He laughed in his sleep. No one approached the door again. But the door didn't wait. The next morning, it had moved. Up 3 decks, outside the command chamber, and it was larger now, twisting slightly, opening and closing with the rhythm of a heartbeat that didn't belong to any species aboard the Dawn Reach. Meanwhile, the walls continued to speak. They whispered regrets, things no one had told anyone. Memories the crew had buried long ago. A janitor wept when he heard his dead brother's voice coming from a vent. A diplomat collapsed in horror after the ship repeated his private betrayal from decades ago, word for word. The vessel was bleeding memory, and the silent man was at its heart. They tried to reach him again. This time, they sent diplomat Rena Viss and priestess Nivelle together. Not to confront him, but to ask him one thing: can this be undone? They walked through corridors that weren't the same as the ones they had walked before. The ship had changed shape again. No alarms, no updates. Just different. As if reality now obeyed something older than logic. And in the darkness between sections, they saw her again. The goddess. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood, at the edge of space and time, watching them. Her presence wasn't like light. It was like the memory of light. A weight behind their eyes. A taste of eternity too wide, for minds so small, and when they blinked, she was gone. They found the man sitting in the same place as before, but he wasn't the same. His skin shimmered faintly, like it remembered the stars from before they were born. His voice, when he spoke, was layered with echoes. Some old, some unborn. "You came to beg," he said without looking. "No," Nivelle whispered. "We came to understand." He looked at them then. His eyes held galaxies and war, and grief so ancient it had teeth. "She gave you everything," he said. "Hope, life, stars to dream beneath, and you gave her chains." Rena trembled. "We didn't know. We weren't there. But you carry their name," he said sharply. His tone cracked the floor beneath him. The goddess stirred behind the walls, and names carry blood. Nivelle stepped forward. If we remember, she said softly. If we accept, can she stop? The man tilted his head. She doesn't want revenge. Rena's breath caught. Then what does she want? His reply came in a voice not his own. The ship answered. She wants you to listen. And then he showed them. Not with words, not with visions, but with memory. Raw, unfiltered. He opened their minds to the truth, and they saw the day it began. A long dead world, its skies cracked from war, a woman standing alone, her people gone. Not a goddess, a scientist, a mother, a leader. Her name was lost, but her pain survived. They had begged for peace. The 26 had promised protection. But when her people discovered something the others feared, something older than the stars, they were erased, not just destroyed. Erased. History rewritten. Records deleted. Entire star charts shifted to hide the shame. And the woman they feared most, the one who held knowledge that could unmake empires, they bound her soul to nothingness. A living prison. But they failed, because she had bound herself to him. Before the end, a boy, barely alive, a last hope, a vessel, a warning. Nivelle collapsed. Rena screamed, and the silent man wept again. I am not your enemy, he said, but I am your reckoning. The goddess stirred, and this time everyone felt it. Gravity reversed for 3 seconds. Bones snapped, glass screamed, and in every mind aboard the ship, one truth echoed. We were never meant to forget. The door reappeared in the center of the command deck, and this time, it opened on its own. Inside was not darkness. Inside was a throne, and on that throne, the woman waited, no longer bound, no longer forgotten. She had returned, and her eyes were wide with sorrow. The sorrow of gods. The door stayed open. Nothing stepped through, nothing needed to. What stood inside was not a thing, not even a presence. It was understanding dressed in the shape of the forgotten. They called her a goddess, but she had not been born divine. She had been made divine, by betrayal, by grief, by the endless prayers of the murdered who had no gods left. And now, she watched. She watched through the walls of the ship, through the veins of its systems, through the eyes of the man who had become her vessel. And for the first time since her awakening, she wept. Not tears, not blood, something else. A black liquid that crawled from the throne across the floor. Where it touched metal, memory returned, and what the ship remembered. It tried to erase. Walls peeled back, revealing corridors no one had walked in centuries. Not because they were hidden, but because they were never supposed to exist. Rooms filled with bones. Human bones. Chivalry bones. Even species long declared extinct, all of them dreaming. Some still whispered, some still begged, others just stared, hollow-eyed at doors only they could see. When the crew tried to step inside, their own reflections stopped them. Mirror-like surfaces formed on the walls, showing them not who they were, but who they should have been. And that was the true terror, because every image was better than the truth. Rena Weiss wandered one of the hidden wings, alone. The lights above her pulsed in time with her heart, and somewhere behind the walls, something whispered her name, not in hate, but in recognition. She stopped at a hatch covered in roots of old circuitry. Beneath it, carved in rust, was the symbol she had seen in her dreams, the chained sun. She reached out. The hatch opened without her touching it, and inside, in the silence, she saw her father's face. But her father had died when she was 12. He sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, humming a tune from her childhood. "You don't belong here," she whispered, tears falling. He opened his eyes. They were full of stars. "Neither do you," he said. Then he faded, just light and ash. She fell to her knees, and the hatch closed behind her. On the command deck, systems began failing, not because of malfunction, but because they refused to work. Navigation shut down. Life support shifted into emergency mode, and messages from the ship began appearing without prompts. Not typed, not recorded, just written. Truth cannot be buried. Not forever. Witness me. She loved you, and you silenced her. The council, now down to 9 members, huddled around the core, desperate, starving, hallucinating. Ambassador Volric tore off his robes and tried to carve the words into the floor with his nails. His fingers bled, but the floor remained clean. No one could mark the ship anymore. Only she could. In the deepest part of the vessel, the silent man stood for the first time in days. He walked barefoot down the corridor, and the corridor followed him, reshaping, bending, expanding around his presence. He didn't look behind him because he didn't need to. She was always there, her sorrow wrapped around him, like a second skin. He remembered her final breath before the fall. He remembered the light she gave him, the promise to survive, to carry her forward until the stars remembered. And now they had. He arrived at the heart of the ship, the throne room, not built by engineers, grown by memory. Above the throne, her form floated, changing each moment, sometimes mother, sometimes monster, always watching. He stepped forward and knelt. They have seen, he whispered, but they do not understand. She didn't speak, but he felt her sorrow deepen. Not hate, not vengeance, just sorrow. So heavy it cracked the metal floor beneath him. The remaining crew began collapsing into sleep. Forced dreams, shared, not nightmares. Memories. The same memory. They saw her kneeling among the dead of her people, building a machine to preserve what she could. They saw the betrayal, ships arriving not with aid, but with fire. And they saw the moment she poured her soul into that machine, into him, a boy, a witness, seed not of revenge but of truth. Priestess Nivelle stood on the observation deck, watching the stars shift into impossible patterns. Each constellation now resembled a face, a hand, an eye. And then, they all closed, like blinking. The stars blinked. And when they opened again, she saw it. Her, the shape of her, in the dark between galaxies, vast, wounded, reaching, and Nivelle finally understood. She didn't want justice. She didn't want blood. She wanted to be heard, to be remembered, to be known. But they had silenced her for so long, and now the silence was breaking, not with screams, but with truth. All over the ship, names appeared, millions of them, on walls, on screens, in voices carried by the wind in the vents, names no one recognized. But the silent man did. Every one of them, the lost, the erased, the forgotten. And at last the ship stopped moving, because it had arrived, not at a place, not at a star, but at a moment. The moment the gods remember who made them and why they fell. The man stood, turned toward the last crew still clinging to their lives, and he said, "She does not ask for forgiveness. She asks if you can still feel." Then the floor split open, revealing the original chamber, the place where she died, where the betrayal happened, sealed away across space and time. Now open, now alive. They were all falling toward it, into memory, into truth, into the sorrow that makes gods out of ghosts. Prophecy of the forgotten, they fell without falling. They breathed without air. They screamed without mouths. The crew of the Dawnreach, once chosen envoys of peace, now drifted through the chamber of memory. The buried core of the ship that was never built but grown from grief, guilt, and ancient truth. They were not floating through space. They were falling through what they'd tried to forget. And there, beneath the floorless void, stood the throne of ash and bone. And upon it, she waited. Not a monster, not a goddess, just a woman. What was left of her? What they had left behind? The chamber pulsed like a heart. Every beat sent waves of memory through their skin, ripping illusions from bone, peeling pride from flesh. They saw it all now, not through dreams, not through myth, but as if they themselves had lived it, because maybe in a way they had. Some part of them, some twisted spiritual legacy, had helped bury the truth beneath centuries of diplomatic lies and noble silence. They had sat at tables built from genocide. They had walked corridors lit by the bones of the innocent, and now the truth refused to stay dead. The silent man stood at the center of the chamber, his body cracked with light. Not wounds, fractures. Through him, the past bled. His arms shook, not from weakness, but from restraint, because inside him she stirred. Not to consume, not to destroy, but to test. They remember now, he whispered. The chamber listened, the air trembled, and from the walls, the names came again, millions of voices, a choir of the forgotten. They chanted not in rage, but in mourning. What do you want from us? Someone cried. Maybe the admiral, maybe the priestess, names had no weight anymore. The man looked up, eyes burning silver. I wanted to be free. She wanted to be heard. His voice echoed across the chamber. But you made us your curse. The goddess rose behind him, her form no longer shifting, no longer cloaked in horror. She was beautiful, not perfect, not divine, just real. And in her face was the sorrow of every mother who buried a child, of every dream turned to dust by the pride of empires. You buried me, she said, her voice made of starlight and grief. You called me danger, threat, abomination. Her gaze swept across the crew, the council, the watchers, but I was only the mirror, and suddenly the crew understood. She had not created the horror, she had reflected it. Their horror, their secrets, their violence, all mirrored through her and amplified by him, because he could not forget. The chamber cracked open, and the ship shattered, with it. But no one died, not in body. Their bodies remained, but their souls. They were pulled through the mirror, and there, on the other side, they saw the truth of themselves. Some wept, some laughed, some went silent forever, because what they saw was what the galaxy had become, a monument to silence, a library of lies, a legacy built atop the ash of the forgotten. The goddess stepped forward, no longer distant, no longer hidden. She placed her hand upon the silent man's shoulder, and the chamber listened, not with ears, but with memory. And then, for the first time in an age beyond counting, she knelt, not in submission, but in forgiveness. You carried me farther than I deserved, she said. You remembered when none would. He looked down at her, his voice broke. I didn't carry you. You carried me. And the chamber wept. Walls melted into stars. The air folded into song. The ship was no longer metal. It was story. A vessel of sorrow, becoming something more. And every soul aboard it now had a choice. To listen, to change, or to be swallowed by what they had denied. Some chose silence. They dissolved into the walls, becoming part of the legend they helped bury. Others fell to their knees, not in worship, in apology, in awe, in understanding. The ship reformed. The door closed behind them. And when it opened again, the dawn reach floated above a silent planet, lush, green, unmarked on any map. It was her home, reborn, made from memory, and planted now as a seed of truth. The silent man stood alone at the edge of the bay. No one spoke. They just watched him. Watched. As the goddess dissolved into light beside him, her task finally complete. Her voice lingered. Do not forget again. And then she was gone. He turned to the crew, to the surviving 9, to those who had remembered. Take this story, he said, and burn it into the stars. not as myth, as warning. They nodded, some cried, some just stared into the sky. Because now they understood what horror really was. Not monsters, not gods, but forgetting. Forgetting the blood beneath your peace. Forgetting the screams behind your progress. Forgetting that the dead do not stay silent forever. The prophecy had never been about revenge. It was about remembrance. And now, the galaxy would remember. Forever.